Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. The Pakistan Army says its forces have foiled plans of hostile agencies to radicalize the youth in the country. Giving an overview of the dividends earned through Operation RADD-UL-FASAAD, which was launched 4 years ago, Director General of ISPR, Major General Babar Iftikhar, said this operation was not area-specific and its domain extended to the entire country. He said terrorists and extremists are rendered completely ineffective by curtailing their freedom of action. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Italian Ambassador Luca Attanasio and a policeman traveling with him have been killed in an attack on a United Nations convoy. It was not immediately clear who was behind the attack. The United Nations has called on Myanmar military to stop the repression immediately and release the prisoners. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' statement comes as a general strike is being observed in Myanmar to oppose the coup. Thousands of protesters have gathered across the country despite the military ruler's threat that confrontation would cost more lives. The World Health Organization says the coronavirus outbreak will end in early 2022. WHO's Director for Europe, Hans Kluge, said the pandemic will still be prevalent in 2021, but more manageable than the last year. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.4 million lives and infected more than 111 million people so far. Pakistan has reported 16 deaths overnight, the lowest number of fatalities since the second wave started in the country. And in the Pakistan Super League, Lahore Qalandars will take on Quetta Gladiators today at National Stadium, Karachi. They have already won their opening match against Peshawar Zalmi. Islamabad United also opened their winning account in the league by defeating Multan Sultans by 3 wickets. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. The Pakistan Army says its forces have foiled plans of hostile agencies to radicalize the youth in the country. In a press conference in Rawalpindi, Director General of ISPR, Major General Babar Iftikhar, gave an overview of the dividends earned through Operation RADD-UL-FASAAD. He said the intensive nationwide operation has successfully thwarted hundreds of terrorist plots across the country since its launch. The DG ISPR said in the past 4 years, over 375,000 intelligence-based operations were carried out. He said Pakistan's enemies are engaged in a massive propaganda campaign to obstruct its prosperity. To a question, he said the country's peace is directly linked with peace in Afghanistan. He added tribal areas have now been brought into the national mainstream thanks to the National Action Plan. Now, for more on this, we are being joined by Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi, retired. Sir, thank you so much for your time. Sir, the military says Pakistan's strategy in the war against terrorism was based on 4 concepts: clear, hold, build, and transfer. Please explain this.
Thank you very much. Just to elaborate, that clear means that actual fighting and clearing the area from all the miscreants, from all the negative forces. Then it is hold, which means that you stay in that area and make sure that nobody comes back, and you build confidence of the people so that they can come back in those areas. And then, of course, these two are the responsibilities of the armed forces. Then you have to be there and develop the area. Then, of course, the political forces, they have to come in, and then they need to develop it. And in that also, military can give a helping hand. So overall, all-encompassing, it means that clearing the area, making it safe for the people, and then later on helping in the development works. This is what I think he meant by saying all this.
Sir, the military reiterated that Pakistan has no favorites in Afghanistan and its only objective is to bring peace to the war-torn country. How do you explain this?
Normally we were being, you can say, there was a finger pointing that we are harboring certain terrorists and there are terrorist camps and all that. But later on, history proved, and although even those who were actually maligning us, they themselves came out very clearly that no, Pakistan was not involved at all, and all this thing was, being perpetrated by some other forces, and Pakistan was clearly redeemed as far as this thing is concerned. So, we Pakistanis believe that peace in Afghanistan means peace in Pakistan, and we cannot afford to have any favorites there that's siding with somebody or helping somebody against somebody else, because ultimately, in the long run, the people of Afghanistan have to decide their own fate, and we will just help them. We can assist them, all right. We can bring them on talking terms. We can do all this. And I think the clear example is that in spite of the fact that we keep on facing some difficulties as far as, some terrorist camps are concerned across the border in Afghanistan. But you must have noticed that, especially recently, we have never blamed the Afghan government for doing all that. And we are also trying to assist Afghan government and Afghan Taliban to talk to each other, to bring them on table. So we do not take sides, because taking side would mean that we will become a party. And becoming a party would mean that in the long run, probably it will not be a peaceful Afghanistan. So that is what I think, went from this.
Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi, thank you for talking to Indus News. And now let's talk more on this with Lieutenant General Ghulam Mustafa, retired. Sir, thank you so much for your time. Sir, Operation RADD-UL-FASAAD has completed its 4 years today. How do you see Pakistani security forces' success in the operation?
Pakistan has come a very long way. Those of us who have seen it happening to Pakistan, and then Pakistan's response starting 2008, 2009, there's been very tough, very, very demanding journey from there on. And as DG said, from terrorism to tourism, it's not been easy. People of Pakistan have sacrificed a lot. We lost a lot of very valuable lives. And that, I think, is something to be grateful for. Second thing, which I think is a very important thing that DG brought out, was that it was not possible unless people of Pakistan was totally with and standing with the Pakistan Armed Forces. That, I think, defines Pakistan Army. That defines Pakistan. That defines Pakistan's main strength, after, of course, belief in Allah Kareem. And the third thing is that starting from 2008, where Pakistan was scared, the world was scared, we were actually being dubbed as the epicenter of terrorism in the world. Today, you find that the world is now coming back to what is Pakistan's reality. It's real. It's a very important country in the region. The connectivity is critical. Sports is coming back to Pakistan. Tourism is coming back to Pakistan. And Pakistan's economy, which has actually touched rock bottom, is now recovering slowly. It's a painful journey, slowly, but it's doing that. And overall, if you see that the peace in Pakistan today is something that we have started taking for granted. And those of us who have been through this, they can tell you that it wasn't so always. And I think that's the highlight of today's briefing. But also we must remember that the journey is not over. And the war that Pakistan is now subjected to has many wider dimensions, like cyber warfare. There, Pakistan has still to come up to speed and meet the challenges that we are faced with. The Pakistan that is being pressurized from, let's say, from India across the border, and India using, another country is using Pakistan's soil to undo what Pakistan has done. That, I think, is something that we need to be on the guard. And also we need to be on the guard with regard to how our social media domain is being used or misused for and against Pakistan. And I think all in all, we can take a lot of heart from it. And we can also be grateful to Almighty Allah. But more importantly, we must continue. This is what I think was the crux. Finally, before I sign off, I think you must have noticed that the DGISPR was deliberately avoiding stepping into what is civil government's domain. It deliberately opted not to answer the questions which are purely in the civil government's domain, highlighting this fact that the armed forces of today recognize the civilian supremacy, and that is how I think it should be. And that is what people of Pakistan, and that is what distractors of Pakistan armed forces must understand.
The government's writ has been imposed in tribal areas while over 300 terrorists were neutralized. What is your take on the elimination of terrorism from Pakistan?
We have done the major work. Now it's time to wrap up. It's time to, we can't lower our guards because the threat from across the border and the enemy from within is not yet over. And all those cells, sleeper cells, have not been eliminated. But terrorism, as it was about 15, 16 years back, is now down to about, I think, if you scale of 1 to 100, if it was 100 at that time, it's now something like 5, 6. Obviously, we're taking casualties. Our soldiers are still in the field, sacrificing themselves for the sake of our people and the country, Pakistan. That is something that we must understand, that this is an ongoing, tough state where the last-ditch battle is probably going on. It may take some time, but inshallah, Pakistan is out of the woods and into the sunshine.
Lieutenant General Ghulam Mustafa, thank you for talking to Indus News. And now moving on, Indian occupation forces continue to carry out raids and crackdown operations in many parts of occupied Kashmir. They conducted house-to-house searches in different areas of the Budgam district. The troops also launched a massive cordon and search operation in the Shopian district. They have arrested a youth in Pulwama district. The personnel forced local shopkeepers to close their outlets. Meanwhile, the All-Parties Hurriyat Conference has called for a shutdown in the valley on the upcoming visit of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And in India, hundreds of thousands of people have gathered in northern Punjab state to show strength against the new farm laws. It is one of the largest rallies against the central government's controversial legislation so far. The farmer leaders also called on supporters to amass outside the capital, New Delhi, on the 27th of February. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Indian farmers have already been camped outside Delhi for nearly 3 months. Earlier, farmer leaders organized another grand meeting as part of the ongoing protests. Both sides have met for several rounds of negotiations but failed to break the deadlock. Protesters have vowed to carry on the protest until the laws are rolled back. And in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Italy's Ambassador Luca Attanasio and a policeman have been killed in an attack on a UN convoy in the eastern part of the country. Local officials say the convoy was attacked during an attempted kidnapping by unknown assailants. The Italian Foreign Ministry has confirmed the incident. It was not immediately clear who was behind the attack. Attanasio had been Italy's head of mission in Kinshasa since 2017 and was made ambassador in 2019. Meanwhile, the United Nations has called on Myanmar's army to stop the repression immediately and release prisoners. Secretary General Antonio Guterres was speaking to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. The UN chief said they see the undermining of democracy, use of brutal force, and arbitrary arrests in Myanmar. Guterres said serious violations against minorities, including the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya, must end. Earlier, the U.S. said it will continue to take firm action against Myanmar's authorities over the violence. Meanwhile, a general strike is being observed in the country to oppose the February 1st military coup. Thousands of protesters have gathered despite the threat of more violence by the military rulers. And the UN atomic watchdog has reached an agreement with Iran to continue its necessary verification and monitoring of Tehran's nuclear activities for up to 3 months. More details in this report.
In a press briefing following his return from Iran, the IAEA's chief Rafael Grossi said There will be less access and no more SNAP inspections from Tuesday. Grossi said talks with Iranian officials produced a good, reasonable result that salvages the situation for now. The IAEA chief said the understanding allows the parties to suspend or extend the agreement. He added that temporary bilateral technical understanding also paves way for political consultations at other levels. Grossi's visit to Iran came before a February 23rd deadline set by Iran's parliament for the U.S. to lift crippling sanctions or Tehran will halt SNAP IAEA inspections. Earlier, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif also said that the U.S. must take corrective measures to revive the JCPOA.
A senior White House official says the U.S. has begun communications with Iran over its detention of American citizens. In an interview, National Advisor Jake Sullivan said the U.S. will not accept unlawful detention of its nationals. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson said Tehran has received messages from the Swiss embassy and other states to pursue this issue. However, Saeed Khatibzadeh debunked the claims of direct talks with the U.S. He reiterated that Iran's policy is to get released its prisoners in the U.S., adding that Iran is ready to address the issue. More stories after a short break. Stay with us. We're back with more stories. The World Health Organization says the coronavirus outbreak will end in early 2022. WHO's Director for Europe, Hans Kluge, said the pandemic will still be prevalent in 2021, but more manageable than the last year. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.4 million lives and infected more than 111 million people so far. More on the pandemic in this report.
The number of new coronavirus cases in the hardest hit areas around the world is decreasing. However, the new variants are causing the cases to flare up in many other regions. In Britain, more than 17.6 million people have received their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, while daily deaths and cases also slipped. In Italy, a top virologist has warned that coronavirus cases are rising again largely due to the more transmissible variant first detected in the UK. Meanwhile, the United States COVID-19 death toll is approaching 500,000, with President Joe Biden planning to memorialize the lives lost. The U.S. infectious diseases official Dr. Anthony Fauci said Americans may still be wearing masks in 2022.
We are still at a level that's very high. What I don't and none of my colleagues want to see is when you look at that slope to come down that it say, wow, we're out of the woods now, we're in good shape. We're not, because the baseline of daily infections is still very, very high. It's not the 300 to 400,000 that we had some time ago, but we want to get that baseline really, really, really low before we start thinking that we're out of the woods.
Japan's vaccine rollout has encountered problems only less than a week after it was launched. Meanwhile, quarantine-free travel from New Zealand to Australia has resumed ahead of a downgraded alert level expected in Auckland today. Australia has started its mass COVID-19 vaccine program as the country looked set to report no local cases for the third straight day.
It gives me an assurance that I am actually protected in any instance. If anything happens, I know that I'm actually protected. So it gives me a great confidence that I can actually walk into those sites and do my duty as normal without any fear and go back to my family, making sure that I'm not going to be passing them anything.
India's COVID-19 death toll is approaching 11 million mark as Western Maharashtra state is set to impose new restrictions in 4 districts. Meanwhile, in a report, World Bank said Palestinians' COVID-19 vaccination plan faces a $30 million funding shortfall.
Whereas in Pakistan, 16 people have died of coronavirus during the past 24 hours. It is the lowest number of fatalities reported since the second wave of the outbreak in the country. The last time the country reported 16 deaths was on the 17th of October. The country's death toll has jumped to 12,617. The ministry says 1,160 tests came out positive yesterday. Meanwhile, there are more than 24,000 active cases in Pakistan at present. In Indonesia, thousands of residents are being evacuated on the outskirts of the capital, Jakarta, amid flooding. The Disaster Management Agency says more than 28,000 people were affected in Bekasi and Karawang districts. Officials say the embankment of the Citarum River broke, which resulted in floods. Earlier, 5 people were killed in the severe flooding that submerged entire neighborhoods in Jakarta. Thousands of houses in the area are covered with 100 to 250 centimeters of water and are without power. Meanwhile, thousands of people have fled to temporary shelters as the tropical storm DUJUAN submerged dozens of villages in the southern Philippines. Country's Disaster Risk Management Agency said 2 regions, including the country's nickel mining hub of Caraga, were hit the hardest. It said the floods also damaged some houses and bridges in the province of Surigao del Sur. The bad weather also prompted the cancellation of at least 36 domestic flights. Philippines Weather Bureau said heavy rains are expected to continue over Caraga and several other provinces today. Moving on, the UAE has signed arms deals worth $1.3 billion with multinational military enterprises. The agreements were inked on the first day of the 15th International Defense Exhibition and Conference in Abu Dhabi. Over 900 defense companies from more than 50 countries and regions are participating in the 5-day event. The world's top military companies, including from China, have brought their latest products to the event. They exhibited cutting-edge technologies in the international military and innovative defense fields. The exhibition also includes several activities, including aerobatics and a dynamic display of equipment. However, due to the COVID-19 outbreak, the number of exhibitors is smaller than last year. And Israel has closed all Mediterranean beaches as an offshore oil spill deposited tons of tar across more than 160 kilometers of coastline. The Environmental Protection Ministry is trying to find the ship responsible for the spill. Officials said the spill is the worst ecological disaster and will take months or years to clean up. They said the event began last week during a winter storm, which made it harder to see the tar approaching and deal with it at sea. The deposits have wreaked havoc on local wildlife as a dead young fin whale washed up on the beach after ingesting the viscous black liquid. And United Airlines says it is grounding 24 Boeing 777 airplanes with the same type of engine that suffered a failure after takeoff on Saturday. This comes after the Federal Aviation Authority said its inspections will require some planes to be temporarily grounded. In a statement, the authority said it will step up inspections of 777 aircrafts with Pratt & Whitney 4000 engines. United Airlines said it will work with U.S. regulators to ensure the aircraft meets rigorous safety standards. Boeing has also recommended suspension of the use of its 777 jets with Pratt & Whitney 4000 engines. Meanwhile, Japan has asked all airlines using Boeing 777s with the same engine to avoid their airspace. And a 139-year-old house in San Francisco has been moved 6 blocks away from its original location on a truck. The move was made possible by an extensive team of engineers and construction workers. The mint green Victorian house was loaded onto a flatbed truck and moved to a new location. Spectators turned out to cheer and take pictures as the 5,000 square foot house began its journey. Construction workers were needed to cut back branches so the house could pass down tree-lined streets. The cost of moving the 6-bedroom house was roughly $400,000. Local media reported that a developer plans to build an apartment building on the site where the house once stood. And now for the latest in business. European shares fell as concerns over risk of higher inflation. It comes after a jump in commodity prices tempered optimism around a vaccine-led economic recovery. The Pan-European Stock 600 index was down over 0.5%, led by declines in technology companies, food and beverage stocks. Britain's FTSE 100 dropped 0.4% as Prime Minister Boris Johnson plots a path out of COVID-19 lockdowns. Meanwhile, Germany's benchmark stock index dropped the most among its European peers, down 1.1%. Meanwhile, Bitcoin has hit another peak, rising above $58,000 as it continues its strong momentum this year. The cryptocurrency has risen more than 90% since the start of January, pushing its total market value above $1 trillion. The recent spike has been fueled by Tesla and other big companies accepting it as payment. However, Bitcoin has a track record of wild price swings and has fallen sharply a number of times since it was created in 2009. And now it's time to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.